The story revolves around Satoru Fujinuma, a 29-year-old struggling manga artist who has a strange ability that he calls an ability that sends him back in time by a couple of minutes to prevent unfortunate events. But one day his mother gets murdered, and Satoru gets wrongly accused of murdering her, and then Revival sends him 18 years into the past. Satoru was on his way to make a pizza delivery when suddenly his Revival ability activated. He went back in time, and then he spotted a truck that was going out of control and the driver who was sleeping. The truck was going straight toward the child. Satoru quickly got into action and saved the child by crashing himself into a car. He wakes up in a hospital, having been in a coma for nearly 2 days. His coworker, Eri Katajiri, praised him for saving the child. Later, Satoru finds his mom, Sachiko Fujinuma, living in his apartment. She decides to live with him for a while. She reminds Satoru of an incident when he was a child, where his classmates were getting kidnapped and murdered. He remembers his friend Yuki being framed. The next day, again the ability activates, but this time Satoru asks his mom for help. She spots a suspicious man and takes a picture of him. Later, they meet Eri, and Satoru's mom invites her for dinner. Sachiko recognizes who the kidnapper is. She looks into the past news articles and discovers what the kidnapper's real identity is. Later at home, someone came behind Sachiko and stabbed her, ending her life. Satoru arrives at his house. He finds his mother on the floor, covered in blood, lifeless. Meanwhile, his neighbor comes and sees Satoru's hand covered in blood. The neighbor called the police. The police arrived fast and were ready to arrest him. Satoru screamed and jumped from his building. Revival gets activated, and the next moment Satoru opened his eyes as a kid, in 1988, when he was 10 years old. Everything was the same as when he was in school, and he went to his seat. Satoru still couldn't comprehend what had happened and why he was back 18 years in the past. Satoru had enough, and he ran home, wanting to see his mother. His house was empty, and his mother had gone to work. Sachiko arrives and finds Satoru sleeping on the ground, and then she gets ready to make dinner for Satoru. After seeing his mother, he knew he had to save his mother, and then he finally decided to change the future. The next day, he spots a lonely girl. Her name is Kayo Hinazuki, and she lives with her mother. Later in the class, Satoru noticed a bruise on her. Satoru's friends get the wrong idea, and that Satoru has feelings for Kayo. They decide to help him, knowing Satoru would never be able to approach her. Satoru prompts and asks Kayo if she would be his friend. She agrees with a condition, and that is to end someone's life. Satoru finds a Kayo essay, where she describes how she wants to live her life in complete isolation. Imagine a world without her, as if being erased from others' lives. Satoru asks his mother if he could invite his friends to his birthday party. The next day, after school, Satoru met Kayo in the park alone, and again he asked if she would be willing to be his friend. Despite being a little girl, she sees right through him, and says he doesn't need to pretend to be nice to others. Satoru was in awe to see how strong-willed she was, despite being only 10 years old and constantly beaten by her mother. Even after all that, she wasn't broken. He invites her to his birthday party. She promises to come, and shyly runs away. 18 years ago, here in the park, Kayo's dead body was found after snow had melted away. Kayo was kidnapped in March, and to save her, he had to know which day she went missing, just like the other 3 victims, and that day was his birthday day. The next day was a sports day, and Satoru had to compete with Amada. Satoru let him win because he was competing against a future champion. Hamada gets mad at him for not giving his all. Then he had the sudden realization that he was repeating the same things that happened 18 years ago, which meant he didn't make any changes to the future. Later, Satoru goes to his Yoshiro-sensei, and he finds Kayo's birthday. It was March 2nd. Kayo's and Satoru's birthdays were on the same day. That means he only has 11 days before Kayo's death. Satoru Metsuyuki, a 23-year-old young man, is a kind man who always helps Satoru. 18 years ago, Yuki was framed for killing Satoru's classmates, and in May 2006 he was sentenced to death row. Later, Satoru goes to Kayo's home, and he finds Kayo in the shed. She has bruises all over her. After seeing Kayo's mom, Satoru realized that Kayo was beaten and thrown in the shed. Satoru tells Yoshiro what he saw yesterday, and surprisingly Yoshiro knew everything all along. Later, Satoru couldn't find his class lunch money. The girl beside Satoru accused Kayo of stealing the money, and Satoru went into rage mode, yelling at her for blaming Kayo. Satoru asks his mother if he can go to the science center. She quickly realizes it's a date. She agrees and even decides to give him more money. Later in school, Satoru asks his friends if they want to go to the science center. All of them knew he was going on a date, and so they pretend to be busy. Satoru goes and asks Kayo's mom, the demon, if they could go on a date. She asks if Kayo wants to go. Kayo nods. The demon gets angry and tries to slap Kayo. Satoru's mom saves Kayo. Kayo and Satoru arrived at the science center, and her mom didn't even beat her. Then again, Satoru realized he was doing the same things as 18 years ago. He still didn't change the future, but then his friends arrived, and he did change something. Finally, the day arrives when Kayo gets kidnapped on March 1st. The day ends, nothing happens, and he leaves her home. The next day, in the morning, he ran straight towards Kayo's home. They went to school. Later, both of them went shopping for his birthday party. When Kayo and Satoru arrived home, both of them were given a surprise welcome by his friends. Satoru gives Kayo a pair of hand gloves, and then he accompanied Kayo to her home. The next day, in school, Kayo was absent. Satoru runs to Kayo's home only to find some foot track, and that day Kayo disappears. Sachiko contacts one of her colleagues, who is a paparazzi. They were trying to keep Kayo's disappearance a secret from the kids. The school decides to make an excuse and tell the kids that Kayo went to live with her grandma. Kayo's mother was the only suspect the police could think of, and 6 days after Kayo's disappearance, Aya Nakanishi went missing. Satoru was passing by Kayo's house and he saw Kayo's mother throwing Kayo's belongings. Seeing that, Satoru was devastated and ran screaming. The next moment, he opened his eyes and his 29-year-old self. He was still getting chased by police. His manager calls him to know why he was absent from work. The manager permits him to live with him. Satoru notices that the manager has called the police, and he quickly runs away only to get caught by Eri. She took Satoru to her home. She believed that he would never kill such a loving mother. The manager was meeting with a mysterious man, who had constant eyes on Eri. The mysterious man followed Eri. The manager was calling police on Satoru, and Eri punched him straight in the face for betraying her trust. Eri gets SMS from Sachiko's phone. Eri prompts if Satoru found his mom's phone. Then suddenly her house started burning and she lost consciousness because of the smoke. Seeing Eri's house burning, Satoru runs inside the fire to save Eri. He finds Eri lying on the ground. The manager came to help him, and he took Eri outside. Satoru realized that the killer was watching Eri, and he knew when her work shift would end. Satoru meets his mom's colleague, Sawada, who used to work with his mother. Sawada explains that Sachiko called him before she died, and he believes that she found who the real culprit was, and that is why she died. Sawada explains how Kayo died. The killer knocked Kayo and sprayed some water to decrease her body temperature, and after her body froze, he throws her body in the shed and left. In the hospital, Eri was under constant watch. Later, Sawada arrives at the hospital to meet Eri only to find Eri's mother lying there. On the other side, Eri comes to meet Satoru. But to their surprise, the police were tracking Eri, and they arrested him. Eri still tried to stop the police, and the only thing she could do was apologize. Then he finally met his real enemy, the one who killed his mother. And, the next moment, he was with Kayo at the science center. This revival continues the same as before, but this time Satoru decides to save Yuki. He throws a stone at Yuki's house, to make it look like they were attacked, and that would be proof of Yuki's innocence. Then he tries to kill Kayo's mother to end every problem, but Kenya stops him. He explained that doing this would even more problems for him and his mother. Satoru decides that instead of dropping Kayo to her mom, he will just kidnap her. They took Kayo an abandoned school bus that was being used as storage. They made this their new hideout. Later in the night he visited Kayo and brought some snacks for her. The next night a sketchy man arrives and the bus drops a bag and kicks the wall in frustration. In the morning, Satoru goes to meet Kayo and gives her lunch, and then he heads to school. The child welfare center arrived at Kayo's house, but no one was at the door. Later when they looked inside the house they concluded that Kayo's mother had run from home. Kayo informs them about the mysterious man and shows them the bag. After looking inside, Satoru knows it was the kidnapper. To keep Kayo safe, Satoru eventually decided to take Kayo to his own house. His mom Sachiko already knew what Satoru was doing and was proud of her son for being brave. The next morning, Kayo goes to her own house, but Satoru and Sachiko were there as well. She immediately understood they were the ones behind Kayo's disappearance, and then she lunged over to Sachiko intending to slice her head in half. Then the child welfare center people stopped her, and the agent ordered Kayo's mother to leave Kayo in their custody. And Yoshiro brought Kayo's grandmother, who kneels and begs her to let Kayo go. Eventually, Kayo's mother gives up Kayo to them. Finally, Satoru saved Kayo, now the next victim. Satoru followed Aya from the morning, wherever she went. His mother caught him and now he has to help carry stuff. Then suddenly Yoshiro comes to his rescue and gives them lift. Satoru finds a bunch of candies in his car. Yoshiro explains he is addicted to candies. The next day, they approach Aya wanting to befriend her. She thinks of them as some weird kids and makes them mad. The Kazu came and invited her to their hideout. Surprisingly, she showed up, and Kazu and Aya started dating. Satoru notices Misato, who is lonely, and follows her, but she leaves. Then he goes to the ice hockey stadium and finds her sitting alone. She went to toilet and Satoru followed her. Satoru gets caught by Yoshiro and asks what he is doing. Misato was nowhere to be seen. He asked Yoshiro for help to check on Misato. Satoru goes to take candy and here Yoshiro reveals his ugly nature and gets mad at Satoru for soiling his fun time. Satoru was devastated after knowing who the true culprit was. Yoshiro took Satoru to a river and accelerated the car into the water, trying to drown Satoru. After 15 years in a coma, Satoru woke up. For the past 15 years Sachiko had taken care of Satoru. The doctor examines Satoru and finds he has lost all of his memories. Kenya and Himori came to visit him, and Kenya became a lawyer and Himori became a doctor. Later Kayo came to see Satoru with a baby. She had married Himori and had a child. What an ungrateful witch. Satoru still struggles to walk. Later in the park some paparazzi are trying to take Satoru's pictures. Yoshiro breaks the camera and warns them. Yoshiro goes to meet Satoru. Yoshiro explains how he got married a few years ago and took his wife's name. After that his father-in-law passed away, so he took his place in the council, becoming a politician. The next day, Yoshiro visits one of the hospital patients, and on the way, Yoshiro meets Satoru. He took Satoru to the terrace to avoid the paparazzi, and then Satoru told Yoshiro that he remembered everything. Yoshiro laughed and exclaimed even if he did no one would believe him. Yoshiro explained that he had tampered with the little girl's medicine and she would die, and in the guilt, Satoru would jump off the roof and end him. But Satoru explained if he wanted to kill him, he would have done it 15 years ago. And when Satoru tries to jump off the roof, Yoshiro stops Satoru and grabs him. Satoru explained the only thing that was giving Yoshiro peace and happiness was letting Satoru live. Yoshiro lets Satoru go intending to die with him, but his plan fails. Satoru's friends already come to save him and Yoshiro gets caught attempting murder. That is where the video ends. If you find my video interesting, then make sure to like and subscribe. I will be making even more amazing videos like this. Peace.